So a warm welcome to everyone to this Research Notes seminar hosted by the Resources, Environment and Development Group, or the RE&D Group, at the Crawford School of Public Policy, Australian National University. So my name is Simon West and I'm a lecturer with the RE&D Group. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're hosting this seminar from the unceded lands of the Ngunnawal, Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples, and recognise the authority and wisdom of Ngunnawal, Ngunnawal and Ngambri elders past and present. I also wanted to acknowledge the leadership of First Nations peoples around the world on concepts and practices of sustainability, which is the topic of today's talk. So today we are very honoured and privileged to have with us Professor Tim Ingold, who's joining us in the early morning from Scotland. So we're very appreciative that you could take the time to join us today, Tim. And Tim will provide a talk titled How to Imagine a Sustainable World. So Tim is Professor Emeritus of Social Anthropology at the University of Aberdeen in Scotland. He's carried out fieldwork amongst Sami and Finnish people in Lapland and has written extensively on environment technology and social organization in the circumpolar north, on animals and human society, and on human ecology and evolutionary theory. His more recent work explores environmental perception and skilled practice. So Tim is the author of many landmark books and journal articles widely read across fields of anthropology, human geography, political ecology, sustainability studies, environmental studies, and related fields. His recent book, The Rise and Fall of Generation Now, which I have here, explores the connections between conceptions of time, the passing of generations, and sustainability. And I can highly recommend it to anyone interested in thinking about sustainability and time in different ways. So Tim is a fellow of the British Academy and the Royal Society of Edinburgh, and in 2022, he was made a CBE for services to anthropology. So the structure of the session is that Tim will talk for about 35 minutes or so, and then we'll open up for about 25 minutes of discussion and questions at the end. And just a couple of notes before we start. So we'll be recording the presentation so it can be made available online through the Crawford School's YouTube channel. And also, if everyone could please just make sure your mics are on mute during Tim's presentation, that would be great. And then we'll open up the conversation afterwards. So a very warm welcome to you, Tim, and thanks so much for joining us. I'll pass over to you for your talk.
Thank you very much, Simon. And thanks all for coming. I begin and end with a conversation. And it's a conversation from which I begin was with the director of an arts organisation in the northeast of Scotland, where I live. She was planning an event to celebrate the planting of a new woodland in the area and wanted me to contribute to the event with a talk. So I asked her what topics she had in mind. And her answer was that I should address the theme of sustainability and its bearing on art, on science and ecology, and on citizenship and democracy. You mean you want me to talk about the sustainability of everything? I replied incredulously, and it seemed at the time like an impossible thing to do. And yet the more I thought about it, the more it seemed to me that sustainability is either of everything or it is nothing. It cannot be of some things and not others. It can countenance no boundaries of inclusion and exclusion. So what kind of everything then can always surpass itself, always have room for more, without at any moment appearing partial or incomplete? And the answer to which I eventually gravitated, and which I'm elaborate in what follows, is that everything is a conversation. And the conversation with which I will eventually end is no more and no less than the world we inhabit. Well, to reach this conclusion and to fulfill the brief that was originally presented to me, I had to pose three subsidiary questions. First, how can we imagine a world that has room for ourselves and for everyone and everything else, both now and for generations to come? Second, what does it mean for such a world to carry on, to keep on going, to be sustained? And third, what can we do to make this happen? And to answer these questions, we need to take a closer look at these two key words, sustainability and everything. Now, I admit that for many of us, the notion of sustainability may seem to have outlived its worth, to have been devalued by overuse and compromised through its co-option by powerful interests, whose overriding concern has been for their own survival in a world of ever more intense competition for dwindling planetary resources. And yet I believe it's a notion we cannot do without, and that to give up on it would be tantamount to the abandonment of our responsibility towards coming generations. The challenge, then, is to give meaning to a term that paradoxically combines the idea of an absolute limit with the limitlessness of carrying on forever. Real sustainability, I'll argue, begins at the moment when the doors of perception swing open, when objectivity gives way to the search for truth or finality to renewal, whereupon what appears from the outside as a limit opens up from within into a space of growth, movement, and transformation, to limitless possibility, or in a word, to everything. And it's with everything that I'll begin. For those of us educated in the ways of modern science, our inclination is to conclude with everything rather than to begin from it. And we can reach a conclusion, we think, only by summing things up. That is, we perform an addition. We add and we add numbers of people, numbers of species, numbers of objects of this or that kind, numbers of characters on the page, numbers of stars in the sky, numbers of cells in the body, numbers of atoms in a pinhead. We are bamboozled by numbers, many of them of a magnitude that defy comprehension. But to add things up, they have first to be broken off from the processes that gave rise to them, from the ebbs and flows of life. You must be able to tell where one thing ends and another begins. The world must be rendered discontinuous. But we soon discover that some things are difficult, if not impossible, to render thus, as discrete, enumerable quanta. Try adding up clouds in the sky, waves in the ocean, trees in the woods, fungi. The difficulty is that these things are always forming and dissolving, growing and decomposing, appearing sometimes to merge and at other times to break up. Take clouds, for example. Clouds are not discrete objects suspended in the sky. They are rather folds of the sky itself, moisture-laden formations of the turbulent and crumpled mass of atmospheric air. Waves, too, are folds, ever forming at the surface where the ocean, in its intercourse with the sky, is whipped up by the wind. You could perhaps count waves as they wash up upon the shore, much as you could count footsteps, breaths, or heartbeats. But what would they amount to? A life, perhaps, with breaths, steps, and heartbeats, all eternity with the waves. Counting would not be adding up a world, but the rhythm of time passing. With trees and fungi, addition is just as impracticable. Who can say how many trees there are in a wood? True, you could measure up, as foresters do, estimating the number and volume of trunks in the stack when a plot is felled. But in so doing, you have already, in your mind's eye, cut each and every tree from all that nourishes it and gives it life, the soil, the fungi that wrap around its roots, the air and the sunlight that fuel its growth. And to count fungi is merely to enumerate the fruiting bodies, ignoring the underground mesh of the mycelium from which they spring. But is it really any different with people? Are they any easier to add up than clouds, waves, trees, and fungi? Can you arrive at everybody by counting heads? Well, in a crude sense, of course you can, as in the taking of a census or a vote, but only by abstracting every head from the living, breathing body of which it is intrinsically a part. Topologically, the body is not a closed container, but an open vessel. Its surface is so intricately infolded that it is practically impossible to distinguish its interior and exterior regions. Normally, we see only one part of every person, namely the fleshy part. The part we don't see is the breath, the air we inhale and exhale, and without which we could not live. So like trees in the wood, people intermingle with one another. They go in and out of each other's bodies, in the beguiling phrase of anthropologist Maurice Bloch, even as they breathe the air. And their voices, carried on the breath and permeating the atmosphere, mingle also, sometimes joining, as in the unison of song, sometimes splitting, as they lift up over one another, without ever separating into discrete sounds. You may, through an act of differential attention, be able to tell one voice from another, to split them along the grain of their becoming, but you cannot count them up. In the polyphony of voices, that is, in the conversation, the collective everyone, like everything, is an intermingling, not a totality arrived at by the addition of individual elements, but what I call a plenum. And by this, I don't mean a space filled up to capacity with things. The plenum is fullness itself, and the things we find there, including clouds, waves, trees, and people, emerge as folds, ever forming by way of the turbulence of lively materials. With the plenum, we don't end with everything, nor, strictly speaking, do we begin with it. We find ourselves instead wrapped in its midst. Now, we have many words to describe the plenum, like world, cosmos, nature, earth. But does the world contain holes that remain to be filled? Are there gaps in the cosmos, voids in nature, empty spaces in the earth? We might regard a patch of ground as a site on which to build. It must first be cleared of obstructions like trees and boulders. Foundations must be dug, materials gathered and assembled. But to clear the ground is not to leave a void, but to smooth it out, as when you remove a crease from a fabric. And to build is not to refill the space, but once again to crease the ground, pressing it into the rising forms of walls and the vault of the roof. Thus, every infill is in reality a reworking, a doubling up that introduces a kink, twist, or knot into the very fabric of the earth. Things that to our senses might appear solid, tangible, and visibly stable, like a building here, a tree or a boulder there, even a human being or an animal, each occupying its particular region of space or moment in time, are truly but the provisional forms or envelopes of incessant movement. So in the plenum, material folds on itself as it goes along. And as it does so, it endlessly overflows any formal envelopes within which it may appear temporarily to have been pulled aside or detained. The plenum then is limitless, not because its capacity can always be increased, but because it forever carries on. We don't ask the ocean whether it has room to accommodate a few more waves, nor does the ocean respond like an overbooked hotelier. Unfortunately, we are full up, for the waves are ever forming, even as they break upon the shore. So everything in the sense of the plenum is not an ultimate conclusion, not the sum total when all is added up, but pure becoming. Things in their becoming continually differentiate themselves from within the plenum, as do clouds in the sky or waves in the ocean, or indeed voices in the conversation, without ever parting company with it. You don't tell things apart by superimposing a conceptual grid on the data of experience. You do so by entering into the process of their formation and by separating them from the inside along the grain. It's a matter of splitting, not cutting. So to get at the difference, compare cutting a log with a saw and splitting it with an axe. In the first case, you impose a system of fixed intervals upon the raw material of timber. Having cut the log into lengths, you can cut them up, like 1, 2, 3, 4. But in the second case, with the axe, you enter into the grain and follow a line of growth, a line incorporated into the timber when it was a living tree growing in the ground. So with cutting, you divide from the outside. With splitting, you differentiate from the inside. So splitting, in short, is a process of what I call interstitial differentiation. Now, for another example of the same distinction, compare walking with surveying. In ancient Egypt, the job of the surveyor, known as a rope stretcher, was to measure up and divide the land into plots, following every annual flood of the Nile. He would drive stakes into the ground at fixed points and stretch the rope from one to the other in order to determine field boundaries. Every stake is a stoppage, the equivalent of what we would now call a data point, and the line of rope connecting them divides the ground. But the walker does not join points, but passes between them. His feet both follow the trail and, in their impression, re-inscribe it. Thus, the trail or the path is not laid out over the ground, but formed from within it. You might be able to tell the path from the ground, but there is no telling the ground from the path. Moreover, turning from walking to writing, we find the same contrast. The handwritten trace emerges from within the texture of the page, where pen meets parchment or paper along a line of movement. But printed words and letters are deposited from above. You can count the number of characters on a printed page, and on screen, your laptop can do it automatically at the touch of a button. But there is no way of counting the number of lines on a page of handwriting. So how can we comprehend everything? Do we collect all the data, count up all the people, survey all the land, add up all the words? Is it a matter of assembling wholes from parts in a nested series of levels in which wholes at one level become parts of wholes at the next level up? Is everything in this sense a vertically integrated totality? Or do we find everything by going along, following every route, runner, trail, and trace? This latter implies an entirely different view of part-whole relations, harmonic rather than totalizing, in which coherence arises from the tension of contrary forces and inclinations. The rope, for example, maintains its torsion and does not unwind because the twist of its constituent strands is contrary to the twist of the strands with one another. In polyphonic music, melodic lines likewise answer to each other in counterpoint. And yet the rope keeps on winding and the music keeps sounding, the waves keep breaking on the shore. The plenum, in short, belongs to time, or perhaps it is time. Everything, in the sense of the plenum, is not an ultimate conclusion, not the sum total when all is added up, but pure concrescence. For in a concrescent world, as the philosopher Alfred North Whitehead taught, everything is perpetually undergoing creation together. Trees growing together in the wood, people living together in society, their voices carrying on together in conversation. This doesn't mean, of course, that the plenary world is only half formed or incomplete. For incompletion can only be judged in relation to a state of finality. In the plenum, by contrast, nothing is final, and every ending is an unfinishing that opens up to fresh beginning. And with this, we return to the question from which I began. How can we imagine a world that is sustainable for everyone and everything, both now and forever? In the plenum, as we found, everything is sustainable because it tends to no limit, but rather opens up to a perpetual process of world renewal. Indeed, in redefining everything as a plenum, we've also come close to achieving a workable definition of sustainability. But it's a definition that stands in stark contrast to that of mainstream sustainability science. In the currently dominant discourses of science, technology, and commerce, the aim of sustainability is not to open up to the power of world renewal, but to harness or capture this power and put it to use in the production of so-called renewables. This is to turn beginnings into endings, the transformative power of a living earth into goods and services for present and future human consumption. In the rationale of sustainable development, the world is understood not as a plenum to be inhabited, but as a totality to be managed, much as a company manages its assets by balancing the books, living off interest without eating into capital reserves. Sustainability is thus defined in terms of goals or targets to be achieved along an axis of progressive development. The sustainability of everything, however, runs counter to this axis. Its commitment is not to progress so much as to the continuity of life. In a study of upland forestry in Japan, anthropologist John Knight offers a cautionary tale of what can go wrong if the axis of development takes precedence over the axis of continuity. Traditionally, Japanese foresters would look after trees for a generation and then cut them for use as house timbers. In the house, the timbers enjoy what the foresters call a second life. In this phase, the direction of care is reversed. For where foresters had nurtured trees in their first life, it's now the trees that nurture the foresters and their families in the second, by furnishing the warmth, shelter, and comfort of the dwelling. During this time, the foresters are looking after a new generation of growing trees, which will eventually, in their turn, become replacement house timbers. And so it would continue generation after generation. Here, the lives of foresters and their trees go along together, responding to one another in a cycle of mutual care that in principle can continue indefinitely. But today, as Knight shows, the cycle has been broken. Conservationists demand that old trees be preserved and not cut. These arboreal veterans are hence denied their second life. And the people, left without timbers to replace old ones as they rot, have taken to building their houses out of concrete instead. Development here has trumped continuity. And this example reveals a deeply entrenched fault line in ways of thinking about the future. Should it be projected as a steady state or anticipated as an ongoing concrescence? Even if it were possible in theory to balance the ship of the world on its keel, the balance could only be sustained by calming the ocean, putting life and history permanently on hold. The future then could be no more than a protraction of the present. Far from ensuring the continuity of everything, sustainability would shut it down. My argument to the contrary is that to bring sustainability and everything back into line, we need fundamentally to rethink our relation to the world, to the future, to time, and to memory. And with this, we come to the third of the questions with which I began. Just to recapitulate, in response to the first question, I've shown how a world that has room for everyone and everything for all time must be imagined as a plenum. In response to the second, I've shown that for such a world to carry on, we need to understand sustainability as concrescence, as a process in which persons and things, as they wind along together, bring each other into being in a renewal that knows no end. The third question, however, asks what we can do now, in our present times, to bring about a world fit for coming generations to inhabit. Is it possible, even in principle, let alone in practice, to fashion sustainability by design? Well, on the face of it, this seems like a fruitless endeavor. For if, say, our predecessors had succeeded in designing the future we now inhabit, what would be left for us? We would have nothing to do, save to fall in line with their already imposed imperatives. Alternatively, were it to fall to us to shape a future for our successors, then they in turn would become mere users or consumers, tied to the implementation of a design already made for them. Design, it seems, must fail if every generation is to look forward to a future that it can call its own. That is, for every generation to begin afresh as a new generation. Perhaps the history of design could be understood as the cumulative record of concerted human efforts to put an end to it, an interminable series of final answers, none of which, in retrospect, turns out to be final after all. Or to adapt a maxim from the environmental pundit Stuart Brand, all designs are predictions, all predictions are wrong. And this hardly sounds like a formula for sustainable living. The sustainability of everything, I've argued, is not about meeting targets. It's about keeping life going. And yet, design based on the science of sustainability seems intent on bringing life to a stop by specifying moments of completion when things fall into line with prior projections. Form is the end, death, insisted the painter Paul Klee in his notebooks. Form giving is movement, action. Form giving is life. So by setting ends to things, do we not, as Klee intimated, kill them off? If design brings predictability and foreclosure to a life process that is inherently open-ended and concrescent, then is it not the very antithesis of life? Or how, following Klee's example, might we shift the emphasis in design from form to form giving? Or how, in other words, can we think of design as part of a process of life whose outstanding characteristic is not that it tends to a limit, but that it carries on. Design for the plenum, for the sustainability of everything, if it is to meet this requirement, must be driven not by plans and predictions, but by hope. With plans and predictions, we can be optimistic that their realization is just around the corner. There is light at the end of the tunnel. But hope and optimism are not the same. And the difference is that optimism anticipates final outcomes. Hope does not. The verb to hope is not transitive, like to make or to build, but intransitive, like to grow and indeed to live. It denotes a process that doesn't begin here and end there, but carries on through. And I suggest that in designing for sustainability, in making it happen, we should treat design too as an intransitive verb, as a way of carrying on that is intrinsically open-ended. Ask not then what you are designing, but how. Let me return to Clay, this time to his celebrated creative credo of 1920. Art does not reproduce the visible, but makes visible. It's not for art, Clay contended, to hold a mirror to reality. It's rather to enter into the relations and processes that give rise to things, so as to bring them into the field of our awareness. And only so long as these relations and processes carry on, can the world offer a sustainable abode for its inhabitants. I believe we can understand design for sustainability as an art in Clay's sense. Far from setting out to transform the world or to bring it into line with a preconceived plan, it is to enter imaginatively into the process of the world's transforming itself, of its autopoiesis. This process, however, unfolds along not one but multiple paths. It is, in essence, a conversation. And like life, conversations carry on. They have no particular beginning point or end point. No one knows in advance what will come out of them, nor can their conduct be dictated by any one partner. They are truly collective achievements. So let's think of designing for sustainability as a conversation embracing not only human beings, but all the other constituents of the life world, from non-human animals of all sorts to things like trees, rivers, mountains, and the earth. All who join in the conversation are contributing, each in their own way, to design for a sustainable world. So let me now return to the challenges put to me in the conversation that originally prompted this talk. In the sustainability of everything, what is there for art to do? What is the relation between art, science, and ecology? And what does our rethinking of sustainability mean for citizenship and democracy? I've argued that sustainability can only be reconciled with everything if we redefine our relation to the world and our place in it. And to do so means acknowledging, with the science scholar Karen Barad, that far from standing outside the world and imposing our designs upon it, we are ourselves part of the world in its differential becoming. Now, for science, this is a hard pill to swallow, increasingly hard as science has sought to immunize itself through the perfection of its instruments and the elaboration of its methodology from what are perceived as distortions arising from any affective involvement of practitioners with the objects of their study. This immunity, however, has also hardened scientists' resistance to the kind of ecological sensibility that would ground their ways of knowing in the habitation of a life world. The goals of today's science, more than ever before, are of modeling, prediction, and control. It has consequently fallen largely to art to take on the mantle of radical ecological awareness that science has cast aside. Many contemporary environmental artists, along with their colleagues in architecture and design, are leading the way in breaking down the barriers between humanity and nature, foregrounding lived experience, and highlighting the richness and complexity, as well as the mystery and strangeness, of a world which human beings have irrevocably altered through their activities, yet in which they remain puny by comparison to the forces they have unleashed. This is not to say that art, in its way of working, is necessarily opposed to science. It's rather to plead for a different way of doing science, different at least from its more arrogant and hubristic versions, by which I mean the kind of big science that in this epoch of the Anthropocene pretends to have the power to fix the planet once and for all. A true science of sustainability, rather than claiming exclusive powers both to explicate the world and to bring it under control, should be more modest, deferential, and above all, attentive in its ambitions, and should be prepared to admit the things it studies into the field of its own deliberations. In short, for it to join the conversation, science must shed its totalitarian impulses and recognize that its peculiar way of knowing is neither sovereign nor absolute, but one of many. After all, how can we possibly know everything? If the plenum is not closed in but open to infinite differentiation, then the same must be true of our ways of knowing it. They too must go along together and differentiate themselves from one another in the ever-continuing conversations of life. It is usual for scientists to call their ways of knowing research, and in the science of sustainability, as we've seen, research is closely tied to the calculus of renewables. The claim of scientific research that it aims to fill gaps in understanding rests on a logic of addition, on the idea that our knowledge of the world, though currently incomplete, will ultimately add up to a totality. However, for an itinerant practice of research that follows the ways of the world from within, there are no gaps to fill. Indeed, my earlier observation that in the plenum every apparent infill is really a reworking applies with equal force to research. What is research, after all, if not a way of searching again, a second search, which at once doubles up on went before and is an original intervention in its turn? That's what research literally means, a reworking in which we differentiate emergent phenomena even as we join with them. Experienced thus as a way of knowing, research continually surpasses itself. It's not an addition, but a concrescence. And it is as apposite to the practice of art as it is to that of science. So for what then do we search? The answer, of course, is truth. In a sustainable world, research never ends because it is most fundamentally a search for truth. Without this commitment to truth, research would be cast adrift, like a lost spacecraft with no recollection of its mother planet and no clue as to where it's heading. Yet, in this cynical and untrusting age, truth is often considered a dangerous, if not deluded idea, best kept inside scare quotes. For many, the very mention of truth conjures up memories of the tyranny wrought throughout history by those claiming to be its masters and to act as its worldly ambassadors, invariably with calamitous consequences for all concerned. We should not, however, blame truth for the atrocities committed in its name. The fault lies in its totalization, its conversion into a monolith that stands eternal like a monument, timeless and fully formed. Research, to the contrary, rests on the acknowledgement that we can never master truth, any more than we can conquer life. Such conquest is for immortals, but for us mortal beings, truth is always greater than we are, always beckoning from beyond the horizons of our present knowledge and understanding. The role of research, then, is to offer an imaginative opening to truth. And yet, by the same token, truth should on no account be confused with fact. The fact stops us in our tracks and blocks our way. This is how it is, it says. Proceed no further. But even if the facts of a case may be incontrovertibly established, its truth lives on. For what appear to us in the first instance as data points or stoppages turn out, when we search again, that is in our research, to be openings that let us in. It's as though the fact rotated by 90 degrees like a door on opening, so that it no longer confronts us face on, but aligns itself longitudinally with our own movements. And where the fact leads, we follow. Come with us, it says. What had once put an end to our search then reappears in research as a new beginning, a way into a world that is not already formed, but itself undergoing formation. It's not that we have broken through the surface of the world to discover its hidden secrets. Rather, as the doors of perception open and as we join with things in the relations and processes of their formation, the surface itself vanishes. The truth of this world, then, is not to be found out there, established by reference to objective facts, but is disclosed from within. And it is indeed the very matrix of our existence as worldly beings. We can have no knowledge of this truth, save by being in it. Knowing, in short, unfolds from the inside of being. Now, this conclusion will naturally be anathema to those who hold that true knowledge of the world can be had only by detaching ourselves from it and looking from a distance. For them, objectivity is the very hallmark of truth. And it is indeed understandable that in a world where facts often appear divorced from any kind of observation, where they can be invented on a whim, propagated through mass media, and manipulated to suit the interests of the powerful, regardless of their veracity, it's natural that we should be anxious about the fate of truth. And to many, it seems that in this era of post-truth, we have lost our grip on reality. But while we are right to insist that there can be no proper facts without observation, we are wrong, I believe, to suppose that observation stops at objectivity. For to observe, it's not enough merely to look at things. We have to join with them and to follow. That's what observation means, to follow attentively, whether by watching, listening, or feeling what someone or something else is doing. And it's precisely as observation goes beyond objectification that truth goes beyond the facts. This is the moment in our observations when the things with which we study begin to tell us how to observe. In allowing ourselves into their presence, rather than holding them at arm's length, that is, in attending to them, we find that they are also guiding our attention. Attending to these ways, we also respond to them as they respond to us. Research then becomes a practice of correspondence and of care. It's a labor of love, giving back what we owe to the world for our own existence as beings within it. So finally, and I'll end here, what does all this mean for democracy and citizenship? It cannot, for one thing, mean democracy in the sense of a head count, which sorts everyone into those with common or opposed interests. In a sustainable democracy, one with room for everyone and everything, now and forever, people cannot be counted, and nor can things. And yet, in their conjoint action and affective correspondence, they constitute a public. As Jane Bennett writes, after John Dewey, publics are groups of bodies with the capacity to affect and be affected. Whether human or non-human, these are bodies in conversation, bodies whose presence is felt by way of their voices as they mix and mingle in the medium. In the democratic conversation, each has something to give, something to contribute, precisely because all are different. And together they comprise what the philosopher Alfonso Lingis, in an apt turn of phrase, calls the community of those who have nothing in common. The meaning of citizenship follows from this. It is about learning to live together in difference. For within a democratic community that is open-ended and unbounded, rather than closed in the defense of common interests, citizenship arises not as a right or entitlement given from the start, but as something you have to work at. This is the work of commoning, not the discovery of what you have in common to begin with, but the imaginative act of casting your experience forward along ways that join with others in carrying on a life together. Only then can citizenship be truly sustainable. The road to sustainability, in short, lies in the conversations of life. And imagining the world as a plenum, I believe, affords a way of thinking about democracy and citizenship that could give hope to future generations. At the present juncture, however, this way of thinking has been pushed to the margins above all by the relentless expansion of big science, aided and abetted by state actors and multinational corporations. And with it has gone the question from which all inquiry must begin. How ought we to live? Big science is not interested in this question because it believes it can already deliver the answer, or if not already, then in a future within its sights. But it has no answer for what lies beyond its predictive horizons. When the dinosaurs went extinct, it was the small mammals that inherited the earth, among them the weasel. The most famous weasel in history could turn out to be the one that bit through an electric cable, putting the largest machine ever built, CERN's Large Hadron Collider, out of action for a week. The collider is perhaps the greatest expression of scientific hubris we have seen, dedicated as it is to discovering the final truth of the universe, one that will leave us mortals with no place to be. It is the delusional project of our time, truly a machine for the end of the world. But the eventual collapse of big science, which is no less inevitable than the collapse of the global economy that sustains it, will not bring the world to an end. It will instead inaugurate a new beginning. A time will come beyond the Anthropocene, and for that, our weaselly hero gave its life, and we must ensure that the sacrifice was not in vain. Thank you very much.